Hello to all of you at Public Forum today. It's wonderful that you're all here. My name is Jacob Dwayne Arrow, and it is my privilege to read the Bible for us. As Christians, we believe it's really important to read the Bible, because we believe the Bible is how God speaks to us and gives us wisdom and tells us about Jesus Christ and his salvation mission for humanity. Today's Bible reading comes from Luke chapter 15 verses 11 to 32. And for those of you who have a Bible with you, I will give you a moment to find that. It's Luke 15, 11 to 32. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am, starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'"
I want you to meet Nicola McDermott. I'm sure you've heard of her. She is that really tall Olympic silver medalist high jumper for Australia. Woo! And her story is one of identity and where to build it. She recently said that she pursued sport as her number one thing because she thought that that would make her happy. She thought that once she was an Olympian and once she reached something, then she'd be happy. You can look up her interview online. She says this, quote, "I got to a level where I had everything I ever dreamed of, but I was still dissatisfied. I realized I had put my identity into performance and achievement. Faith, trust in God, for me was realizing that I am loved regardless of my performance." So she started building her sense of self, her identity, on God rather than sport, and it made all the difference. And now she says to people that she does sport, but it's not who she is. That her performance does not determine her identity. You see, sport was everything to her. She built her identity on it, but she found out that it wasn't core to her identity. Only God provides that stable foundation for personal identity and meaning and flourishing. And that's what we're considering today. Whether God is the core and should be the core to our identity. And I thank you for visiting us and listening in, whatever your background is, whatever you believe. It's great that we can tune in and hear what Jesus says from the Bible about this topic. We do tend to base our identity on many things, not just sport. It might be money or career or looks or family or sex or just ourselves, or academia, or some ideology. There's lots of things we can base our core sense of identity on, our sense of self upon, apart from God. And today, as I just mentioned, I think we should briefly explore what Jesus might say to this topic. Now, we're going to look at a famous story Jesus told, just as a way, as an introduction into this topic. And so it comes in Luke chapter 15. Luke was one of the original 4 historical biographies of Jesus' life and teaching. And in Luke chapter 15, he says this. In verse 11, Jesus tells this story. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. The younger sons, there's 2 sons, an older and a younger. The youngest one wants his inheritance now, and he wants to cash in now and go and spend it. And the father gives it to him. And then he goes on a big pleasure-seeking adventure. You see that in verse 13. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Now, in that culture back then, this would have been an extremely offensive thing to do. He's basically saying, "Dad, I don't care about you. I just care about the stuff I can get from you. I don't want you, I want your money. I don't care about family. I don't care about family responsibility. I care about my own individual pursuit of happiness." Now, for those of you online here today, from a more traditional type of culture or background, you will sense the rudeness of this because you understand the importance of respecting your parents' wishes and even sacrificing your personal desires for the sake of your family. But others of us who have been discipled by Western individualism, people like me, there's kind of something in me that respects this guy a little bit. I know I shouldn't, but just the fact that he's willing to stand up to his family hierarchy and his family culture and even sacrifice it for the sake of his personal fulfillment. So we might have a spectrum of reactions to this guy's action. But the point is, this guy was way ahead of his time. I mean, this is an ancient example of what we now call expressive individualism. Expressive individualism is, as the name suggests, is where we see it as a right to express our individual desires to find our personal happiness. That's just in the air we breathe now. And he's kind of living that way 2,000 years ago, so he's way ahead of his time. He obviously thinks his dad is holding him back in some way from personal happiness, and so he rejects his family identity and seeks to explore his own, based on his own inner feelings. Off he sets on his adventure, and he doesn't hold back, does he, in verse 13? He spends his money in wild living. He expresses himself without many boundaries, I take it. He tries to fill his life up with lots of wine and women and song and work and money and sex and travel and leisure and fun. And I'm sure it was fun while it lasted. But after a while, in verse 14, his money starts to run out. And to make matters worse, a famine hits the country. And he finds himself in need. Something outside of his control, like, say, a pandemic, has brought him to his knees and showed him that an identity built on pleasure-seeking is insecure and flimsy. His quest for personal freedom is beginning to crumble around him. But he's not going to give up his independence from the Father yet. Maybe he can ride through the hard times and then make a comeback to find individual fulfillment after the famine. And so he's even willing to take a job feeding pigs in verse 15, something a Jewish man would never do. This guy's desperate. And he's so desperate and needy, in fact, that he even desires the food that the pig's eating. And so at this point, he's basically hit rock bottom. The quest for freedom, to build his own identity and find his own happiness by expressing his inner desires apart from the Father. That quest has failed, hasn't it? And he comes to the crucial realization that life was actually better back on the farm, back with his father. He realizes 2 basic things. Firstly, that he had everything back then. He had everything he needed with the Father. In verse 17, it says, when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death." You see, he never lacked anything back at home. He was much freer, much more satisfied at home. In fact, even the lowly servants were better off and are better off than he is currently. That's the first thing he realizes. The second thing he realizes is that he's deeply offended the father and he's unworthy of the family name. He's unworthy of the family identity. You see verse 18, I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Just make me like one of your hired servants. He feels unworthy to even be identified as a son any longer. And I mean, he's kind of getting what he deserves, right? Because he practically told his father to drop dead. And in rejecting the father, he rejected his sonship. He rejected his identity. And so if the father lets him back in any sense, it won't be as a son, it'll be as a servant, a hired servant at the edge of the property. So he gets up in verse 20 and he goes to his father. You can see him taking a deep breath and heading towards the family home. And you can imagine him rehearsing his apology, fine-tuning his apology. And as I read that, I'm thinking, good luck, buddy. Good luck even getting close to making an apology. You'll probably get beaten and kicked out of the property before you get to set foot on it. For the father has the right to disown this son, because the son disowned the father. And what happens next is totally culturally unexpected and even scandalous. Verse 20, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, he threw his arms around him and kissed him. That's weird. There's no anger. He's not filled with rage. He doesn't run out to beat him with a stick, and he doesn't excommunicate him from the family forever. He vigorously and passionately embraces him. We see the father's generous, undeserved love for his son. And so the son then starts blurting out his prepared apology. In verse 21, the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And he's right. He is not worthy. Remember, by rejecting the father, he's rejected his identity as a son. But amazingly, he can barely get halfway through his apology before the father interrupts him. He says to his servants in verse 22, quick! Bring the best robe and put it on him. Bring the finger for his finger and sandals for his feet. Prepare the fattened calf. Let's have a feast. Let's celebrate. It's party time. Why? Verse 24, for this son of mine was dead and is now alive. He was lost and is found. And so they begin to celebrate. It's amazing, right? He thought he'd be either punished or demoted in some way to the status of a servant down the back corner of the property with the animals in the barn. But the father gives him the best clothes and the best food and throws the best party. Because it's as though his son has been dead and now he's alive again, or lost for a long time and now he's been found. And when a parent finds a lost child or sees a dead child raise up, they are excited. They're not angry. And so he throws a party. And at this point, we're reminded that there is another brother. Remember the older brother from down in verse 11? And his reaction is very interesting. Verse 25, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard the music and dancing. So he called to one of the servants and asked him, what's going on? Well, your brother has come, he replied, and your father's killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. And what does the older brother do? Go, oh, fantastic, I'm going to come and join the party. No, verse 28, he became angry and refused to go in. Why is he angry? And here's why, I think. Because it doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem just. The younger son should be getting punished, not celebrated. And so the father goes out to plead with him to come into the party. But verse 29, this is very telling. Notice how the older brother identifies. Verse 29, he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. Do you see what the second son's saying? He's saying it's not fair. You should be punishing him, not rewarding his bad behavior. If anyone deserves a reward, if anyone deserves a party, it's me. Because I've done my duty all these years. like a good servant slaving away. You owe me. Where's my payment? Where's my reward? Notice how he identifies not as a son, but as a slave, as a servant, as a worker, as an employee to a boss rather than a son to a father. Very telling. So does the father owe him anything? Nope. He's already given him everything. You want to kill a goat and have a goat? Kill the goat. You want to go for a tractor ride? Go for a tractor ride. You want to have a party? We'll have a party. It's all here already. Verse 31, my son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. What are you talking about? Everything I have is yours already. Now stop thinking about what you don't have and come and join the party. Why? Because verse 32, your brother, he was dead and now he's alive. He was lost and now he's found. It's time for celebrating, not whinging. We don't know if the older brother went into the story because it ends at that point. Went into the party, I should say. So what's going on here? What's this a picture of? Well, it's a picture of how we as humans have basically run away from our identity and purpose by running away from God. And see, God has made us, the Bible says, to find our core identity in relationship with Him. We were made by Him and for Him. Not to build our identity apart from Him, based on just our own sense of self and using the things of creation to build our own identity. No. This story is about two types of rejection, really. Two types of rejection of God and how He responds to that. Both sons build their identity on something else apart from God as Father and them as children. You see, the young son builds his identity on his own selfish desires and so he rejects the father to pursue those selfish desires. And lots of us are like that, let's be honest. The older son builds his identity on his moral performance. He keeps the rules. He's responsible. He does his duty. He's got good moral performance under his belt, and that makes him feel validated, and he expects the father to validate him and reward him and owe him on the basis of that work. Both are ways of rejecting God as Father. One says, get stuffed, and the other says, you're my boss, not my dad. And both are deeply offensive to God. I wonder which way you gravitate, to which son. Maybe the younger son. I don't need a relationship with God because I want to explore my own desires and forge my own identity. Or, I don't need a relationship with God because I can be a good enough person without Him. Both of them are saying, I don't want you, God. I don't need you, God. And to reject God as our Father is to reject our true identity as humans. And it gets us into a lot of trouble. Not only does building our identity on other things not fill us up and satisfy us, as the first son showed, but it ends up with us outside the party, still dead and lost. And what does this story show us? That God is like the Father. He longs for us to stop ignoring Him, to come back into relationship with Him and to find our identity in Him. And what happens when we come back to God? Well, instead of punishing us, which we deserve for slapping Him in the face, no, He embraces us and forgives us and celebrates us. And there we learn to find our identity and our purpose and our satisfaction in Him. So as we finish up, let me ask you to ponder what Jesus is teaching here. Is it possible that you're running from God, ignoring Him, holding Him at arm's distance, building your own sense of self, your identity on things other than God? Good things apart from God, or good works? Can you see the heart of God in Jesus here? He wants you to stop ignoring and denying Him and to come home before it's too late. And when you do, He's not going to be angry with you. He's going to forgive you, embrace you, restore your identity as children, and throw you a massive party. Nicola McDermott says this, I realised, you remember the Olympian? I realised I had put my identity into performance and achievement. Trusting God for me was realizing that I am loved regardless of my performance. Regardless of whether you're the old son or the young son, regardless of how bad you've been in your self-expression or how good you think you've been in your moral, spiritual performance, come to him because you are loved by the Father. He will forgive you, embrace you, and throw a massive party. Friends, investigate, explore to see whether this resonates deeply within you and whether it could be true. Because if it is, it's dangerous to stay outside the party. You won't find your identity out there. The God of the universe, in his Son Jesus, is calling you to find your identity in him and to join the biggest party in the world, in the universe. Come and join the party, friends. Come and join the party. If you'd like to do that, a simple prayer will help you. I'm going to pray it. And I'm just going to leave a little gap of time for you to echo this prayer yourself quietly in your own head if you want to pray this sort of prayer. So let me pray this brief prayer for us and you can repeat it to God quietly. Dear loving Father, I've ignored and offended you. I've built my identity on other things. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Jesus, please help me please show me how to live for you and build my identity on you from now on. Amen.